For our service this morning, I have the great honor to introduce my friend Ben Weger. As we explore this Christian holy day of Easter, I thought it would be great to have some conversations with one of my favorite Christians. Ben serves as the worship director at Trinity United Methodist Church in Madison, Wisconsin. He has a long history with United Methodist Church. He has been a worship leader, which in the United Methodist tradition is a leader of worship who does music, prayer, and almost everything besides preaching. He's done that at the national level, the regional level, and the congregational level for over 13 years. Ben lives in Madison, Wisconsin with his wife Lee and their 3 children, and it's Gianna's 8th birthday today, so happy birthday, G. Ben and I met in seminary, and I am not going to pretend that this is just any guest in our service. Ben is one of my very best friends, and today we're going to just have a conversation like we often do. We sit around, we wish we were in person, and we talk about religion. So welcome, Ben. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Christine.
And we're in together time here, the part of our service where we tell stories that everyone in our congregation can understand. So I thought maybe you could tell us a little story, Ben. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Thank you, Christine. I'm really grateful to share this sacred space with each of you, as virtual and remote as it is. It's a gift to me. So thank you for inviting me. Our lives are so full of so many things, so many experience, so many inputs of information, just so much, especially right now. So thank you for each of you being here and sharing this space with us together. I truly believe that the greatest gift we have in this life to share with others is our story. And I count it a privilege to share a piece of mine with you today. Christine, I don't know, like some people have a lot of childhood memories and some people have maybe memories that are more built off of stories told to them. Like, I don't know about you, like if you're like filled with childhood memories.
I don't remember an awful lot, like certain moments. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, so like for me, same, very similar, like there's fragments, but there's also pieces that are like really, really clear, you know, really, really defined. And for me, one of my earliest memories actually takes place at like a festival, like outdoor, like carnival type of environment. And I remember there were pony rides. And I remember that I didn't get to ride the ponies. And I'm not bitter, I'm working through it. But you know, last fall, my wife and I, we took our kids to a fall festival, well, 2 years ago, back when you could do things like that safely.
Right.
We took our kids to a fall festival and I let my kids ride the ponies. And for $5, it was some of the cheapest therapy that I've ever, you know, personally benefited from.
Get to ride the ponies through them.
Yeah, exactly. But it's, you know, we have these memories, you know, of childhood and of, you know, kind of our coming of age. And then for those of us that have children or experience a role of caregiver, then, you know, how we kind of live through those things with those individuals. And for me, one of my earliest memories was actually a memory of thought. So it was a pervasive thought that always started for me as a child in quiet moments. You know, I can remember being like 4 or 5, like preschool, like pre-kindergarten age, and it seemed like anytime there was nothing else going on around, I would have this thought, wondering, when are they going to tell me? And I had this deep abiding sense that my parents were keeping a secret from me, provided I'm sure they were keeping a lot of secrets from me, because now as a parent, I get some of that. But I had just this gut sense that like they're keeping something from me. And I was very sure that something terrible, even tragic, had happened that cold February morning when I was born. It was a Wednesday, by the way. I don't know how many people know what day of the week they were born on, but that's a fun fact for you.
It feels consistent that you would know that. I love that.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
It's awesome.
That live in here. But some sort of accident at the hands of the doctors, some mistake, a mistake that left them needing to make a choice. I was sure that someone had made a choice to make me a girl. And yet I waited, wondering when my parents were going to decide that I was old enough to tell the truth. And when would they finally just come clean and explain why my body didn't match who I was? And as significant as a question as that was for me, I also knew that it was unimportant in my family setting. And what I mean by that is I had a younger brother who was terminally ill, and I had an older sister who was, perfect, like all firstborn children are. And I, as a stereotypical middle child, was certain that this was something that I shouldn't bother anyone with. And I didn't have the words at 12 or 15 or even 20 to be able to explain what I was going through. In those years, it often just looked a lot like depression. And in middle school, I started writing letters to the people who I considered to be important to me, letters apologizing that I wasn't going to be able to hold it all together and thanking them for their kindness, letters that I hoped would make their way to them after I killed myself and someone began to look through my things. I actually read through some of those letters as I was preparing to share with you all. And it's honestly terrifying now as a parent to realize how much pain and hopelessness can live within a child who appears perfectly happy. And I know, Christine, you can
relate.
Yeah.
I can relate. I can't imagine how much pain you must have been in at that time, but it breaks my heart.
And what I mean by perfectly happy is that I was, what I was going through often looked a lot like success because I tried. I mean, I really tried. And Christine,
Yeah.
you know me, I tried.
If you set your mind to something, you do.
I'm not capable of anything else. And, I tried hard to be who I thought everyone else was expecting me to be, who I was supposed to be. I mean, my teenage years were spent, for context, at a Southern Baptist church down the road from the house that we lived in. And we were there every time the doors opened. But one day when I was about 18, I watched an episode of 60 Minutes about a young adult who had transitioned from female to male. And I remember watching in awe, just like captivated that this was even possible. But I quickly dismissed it because I knew that this would be too hard, this would be too expensive, this would be too impossible. And the honest truth is, I spent the first 30 years of my life so completely paralyzed by the fear of what other people would think or would say. Even when I began to find language to describe the actual hell that I was living in, perhaps maybe the only hell I actually believe in, I couldn't speak the words. What would my parents think? What would my grandparents say? I would definitely lose my job working in the church, no question. So I kept bearing my truth and exhausting efforts to meet the expectations of others. And that worked for a while. I graduated from a super conservative college with a degree in theology, and I had a job waiting for me at a church in Jacksonville, one of the largest churches in the Florida Conference of the United Methodist Church. I moved to Jacksonville, and all of a sudden, like all these things started to catch up with me. During my last year of undergrad, my terminally ill brother passed away. All this stuff buried that I didn't even have words for, and I was truly paralyzed. And my emotional state was just devolving, and I was completely without tools for coping. I just felt like I was covered with this heavy blanket of sad. And it ended up getting to the point that I was not okay. And I ended up spending a week on floor 2A, which was the psychiatric ward of the Orange Park Hospital. And I returned to my church job, and it was very clear that I was being pushed out. I was now a liability.
Not being welcome there anymore?
Yeah, it was like, oh, that's a little on the messy side. You know, we're gonna probably just distance from that. From there, I got hired at another Methodist church. Was there for a short time. They closed the campus I was working at, and I finally decided, you know what, I'm gonna go and serve somewhere where I can be fully myself, even though I didn't really quite even know what that meant yet. I moved to Chicago to help plant the church. Was there for about a year. It became clear that they liked the idea of inclusion, but actually like living that out was something very different. Especially if you were
a lot of places like that.
Yeah. But something really cool happened when I was in Chicago. I fell in love, and you've met my wife, Lee, Christine, and she is the greatest gift of my life.
Absolutely.
And we began to kind of evolve in our relationship, and we had this kind of weird evening where I said to her, you know, I have feelings for you and I don't know what to do. And she was like, I have feelings for you, but I'm not a lesbian and I don't know what to do either, but I keep having these thoughts. Like when I think about you with male pronouns, and like, I don't know why I do that. And I said, well, I do, let me explain it to you. And it was like, she saw me before I saw me.
What a gift, what an amazing gift.
And this kind of moved the journey. We moved back to Florida. I'm going to truncate for time here. We moved back to Florida. I took a job, you guessed it, at another United Methodist church, and was there. And Lee and I were actually living together as roommates in the church parsonage. So that's a story for another
I don't know
time.
that I know that story. We'll have to catch up more.
Yeah, and then everything was great, fine. We actually were both working at the church until we all of a sudden found ourselves fostering a 15-month-old. And it's a little difficult to co-parent covertly. And so it also kind of stirred in us, you know, like we know we want to parent at some point in the journey, and we're not willing to parent in secret.
Yeah.
And so I did what anyone else would do and took another job at another United Methodist church. But this was a church that really promised. I mean, they
said they were going to be good.
They made clear statements. I was really transparent. Like, this is my reality. Like, this is who I'm going to marry. This is the child that we are fostering together. I have a lot of questions about my gender, and I don't know what that's going to look like. I mean, it was like laid out.
And they said they were cool, right?
I mean, they were like proud of themselves. I feel like, you know, to be so extensively.
Look at how great we are in welcoming you in.
Yeah. And Lee and I got married. The pastor served communion at our wedding. You know, just this beautiful journey. And as I began to think more around lines of gender, I scheduled top surgery, which is transmasculine speak for a bilateral mastectomy for gender conforming surgery. And I did that. I got, you know, I had PTO. They knew I was going to be out. They knew why I was going to be out. I mean, the pastor's wife even came to me at one point and was like, hey, I know like this is all really new to me, but I just want you to know that we support you, and whatever we can do, like, please just like tell us, because we don't know what we don't know. And this was right around the same time the Supreme Court, you know, passed marriage equality, and we celebrated with a beer together. I mean, it was just this season of like surreal, you know, that I didn't know the church could be this good.
Of possibility, sure.
Yeah. And so I had surgery on a Tuesday, and when I got back home, by the time I got back home, my phone was just blowing up. And it was my supervisor from the church. He needed to speak with me right away. And like, I'm on significant medication. I am in
a lot of
significant
pain. Yeah.
I'm like, this cannot be that important, before I left for surgery, I had posed the question of, when I return, would it make sense? I feel like that would be a good time for me to change my name and pronouns. Like, there's no other, like, more instant, significant change that's going to happen in my life. Hormones are a slow road. Like, this feels like a natural place to do this. And we kind of agreed to just pick that conversation back up after surgery. Like, it was like a 3-hour meeting, and again, another story for another day. So my phone's blowing up, and long section of the story short, I get home, phone's blowing up, demanding to meet. The pastors had told the staff parish relations committee, which is in that our structure, it's the committee that oversees the hiring and the firing, primarily is their role within the church. Told them that I had given them an ultimatum and forced them into a difficult spot, and said that either you let me come back as Ben, or I won't, which, as I just shared, is
That's not
not even close.
That's not actually how you work either.
I wasn't even sure, like, not only am I not wired that way, I was still like, what am I gonna do? And they told them that they would come to my house, that they would ask me to slow things down, and if I refused, then they would give me the option to resign or be terminated. This is details I learned after the fact.
Wow.
There was no conversation. They came to my house on a Sunday afternoon while
The day after surgery?
About 4 days after.
4 days after surgery. Okay.
Yep. Came to my house, sat on my back porch while our 2 girls that we were fostering to adopt were napping, and fired me in front of my wife. Said that the church wasn't ready. They painted me as a manipulator, when in reality I had just asked a question. And at the time, like I said, we were in the process of adopting our girls, and now I was suddenly unemployed. They put our entire adoption at risk.
Yeah, put your family, a whole family at risk.
And I was left having to explain to my oldest each week that, no, you can't go to church anymore and hear Daddy sing.
That's so heartbreaking, Ben. And especially when you thought these were people you could be in conversation with, you could explore this with, and be supported with. That just breaks my heart.
Yeah, I felt super safe. And then just, old Dodge rug pulled out from under. And at that point, I swore I would never set foot in church again. I know we're gonna, continue and pick this conversation up kind of as we travel. But that's kind of a flyover of my story, and as it relates, within the church. And from there, I actually ended up getting a job at Habitat for Humanity, which was great. And I transitioned there, and they were incredible. It was a picture of kind of what that should look like in a workplace setting. It was pretty textbook, but there's a lot of beauty, wholeness, risk, and real tragedy at the hands of a church community that should support you. I'm so sorry you went through that. Yeah, and I think too, when you grow up as a kid in that environment, trying to find a kind word, that it's like I get why Christianity is off-putting, and why it's repulsive, and why it's and I'm sure many of you are wondering why I'm sitting in the setting that I am, but we'll touch that a bit later.
There's a story as to, I think everyone's really curious to find out how you find your way back to church, and maybe a little why.
Definitely a little why.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your story and your vulnerability with us and your just pure awesomeness. I think it was at Habitat, when you were at Habitat Humanity, that's when I met you in seminary.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's fun that I have only ever known you as Ben. So
It is, and
oh,
I like. I just it's fun to be in a season of life where honestly most people
yeah,
that's who I am.
yeah, it's
And
who you've always been. It seemed very natural. So I'm always captivated by your story and your resilience to get here. So we're going to continue this story. We're willing to keep talking about all of this and how it ties. We will tie this in to Easter because so. Thank you again so much for your story, Ben. It is so compelling, and I think it's really relevant now that we talk about it because we might say, "Oh, this is how it was," but I don't know about you, but Arizona is seeing tons of anti-trans legislation in our state legislature. There are sex education bills. There are sports, trying to ban trans folks from sports. There are still conversion therapy bills out there, bathroom bills. Like it's awful.
yeah, and I mean, I most days I try to just kind of wear blinders, like it's just a lot, right? It's a lot to take in, and um, I can't obviously speak for the experience of everyone on the gender spectrum and as a part of the transgender community, but um, even if it's not, your issue, like right now, I am not looking to compete in sports. Personally, it doesn't matter. Like it's still a personal, like, jab
It's an
regardless.
attack.
And, I am a fairly well-adjusted human being. But I think about if I were a kid right now.
Yeah. 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 And just how hard that can be. And I do think, first of all, so much of that harm is being done in the name of religion. And it's being done out of fear and the need for power. And I don't know about you. I don't think that that's what the Christian story is. I don't.
No, but we've made it that, right? Like
Yeah.
that's become the lived out reality that people now like. It's that idea that to be a Republican is synonymous with being a Christian, or to hold conservative ideologies is synonymous with being a Christian, and even now in way too many spaces that white supremacy is synonymous with being a Christian, like all of these things. And I mean, it's just the exact opposite of like what the person of Jesus actually teaches us if we spend time in the teachings of Jesus, as opposed to in the outpouring of um, the expressions and experiences of the church at large over history. I mean, look at the Crusades, look at, it's like you start to pull back the layers of Christianity, and it's like, oh, wow, this is like a political show.
Right? Always has been.
Always.
Yeah.
Always. It's not new. It's not even remotely new.
So I need to ask what everyone here is wondering, because we've heard your story. We've heard the harm that the church has done for you. We're hearing this, and we've got a lot of people in our congregation who were Christians who left for many of these same reasons, who were never Christians and look, afar and go, what's this? What does Christianity mean to you? And how are you still Christian?
I ask myself.
How's that for the biggest question ever, Ben?
Yeah. No, I ask myself the same question daily, probably. But for me, it's the tradition that I grew up with, right? And we all have that, whether that's what someone consider no tradition. I mean, that's still a tradition, right? Like we all have whatever the narrative of religion or of faith or of some higher power or the universe. Like we all, I mean, we are creatures who seek to make meaning, right?
Right.
And so for me, that just happens to be the narrative that I grew up with. And if you really want to question and lose everything, just go to seminary.
Right.
Like,
it ruins everything. It changes all of our preconceived notions.
Everything.
Yeah. And it was so much fun for me to watch you and so many of our other Christian colleagues go, wait, I'm deconstructing all of my Christian thinking.
Right, because what is like the precipice of Christianity? Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. It's like it's all about this like confident, like black and white ideology of it's just clear, like these are the things, these are the tenets of my faith, this is the Romans road, these are the ABCs of salvation. I mean, it's just all these building blocks of certainty. And I never had those, and I felt like a bad Christian because I didn't have those. But then I went to seminary, and actually what I realized is maybe I actually am kind of a good Christian, if there is such a thing. And I will hold space for anyone in this conversation that isn't quite sure, because I'm not. But you start to all of a sudden understand that, Genesis 1, creation story, is the same creation story from Near East religions dating thousands of years prior to, I mean, like, it's all of a sudden it's not so sacred. The text isn't so sacred. It's more human. I mean, and it's, yes, intellectually we know that like someone wrote that, like God themselves did not grab a pen, and whatever. We have our narratives, but it starts to become, you start to realize that these are all borrowed ideologies from different people's lived experiences of seeking to make meaning. And for me, the reason I still claim Christianity, and I don't claim it in a ultimatum fashion. My faith is not any more correct or clear or whatever than anyone else's. And I think Jesus would agree with that. We can dig on that a bit later. But I'm still here, one, because I really do think there is a lot of good in understanding what the lessons are that Jesus was actually trying to teach. Jesus as a brown man murdered by the state.
It's a political story. Easter is a political story, and I don't think people understand that. Like he was persecuted by the state for his political views.
Yes. And so there's that, and then the other piece is, the other layer, like, okay, so maybe you could be a Christian, but why do you stay a United Methodist, especially when like their like motto is open hearts, open minds, open doors, and yet they've all been slammed in my face. I actually saw that question, or kind of a nod to that. If that Methodists were, well, some are, and that's one of the great challenges in our denomination right now is like you don't know where you're safe or where you're not. Because you might have one church that is and one church that isn't, many that aren't. But for so long as the United Methodist Church and or Christianity at large remain an influential institution among society, I am committed to being a part of changing the narrative and building a better church that's more inclusive, that is more welcoming, that is more diverse, as a parent, as a person, And that is, I mean, that really is the most significant driving force as to why I am still sitting in a United Methodist Church this morning.
And amen and bravo to you. Honestly, I don't know that I'd have the strength to do that. And I just commend you for being in the work and the struggle and to try to change. So we need to hear the end of the story before we get to a song that you did, which is, have you found a church where you can be yourself and be supported, or are you still in a harmful church environment?
So when I'm in Madison, Wisconsin now. When I was still in Florida, and a part of, very active in the conference there, which I don't know what your word is. What would be the?
We have regions, but yeah, the United Methodists are so big that our whole General Assembly would be your regional thing.
Okay. So within the conference, I was, very well known, very active, very. This was not a story that happened in the shadows. We'll just put it that way. And so the day that I was like, I am done, I started getting phone calls from people I had avoided like the plague for years, because they were, advocates and allies, and they were out, some of them were, out open queer people serving in ministry, defying the system. I was like, I can't be anywhere near them, because if I'm associated with them, then I'm going to be outed. It's good. People are going to start to go, why is that person hanging out with that? So these were people that I knew they existed.
And I just need to say, you were a big deal in that conference. Like, you were on stages, you were leading all the things. You were a big deal.
I mean, within the southeastern jurisdiction of the United Methodist Church, which is like Florida to, I think, Mississippi, up the Carolinas, Tennessee. I think that was pretty good geography. If there was a large event looking for a worship leader,
it was you.
As out of 10 is going to be me.
So coming out had a huge cost for you, coming out in all of the ways. And they, just to be clear, they were struggling with what to do with, gays and lesbians, much less,
they didn't even know I was a problem yet, or how to.
They hadn't, yeah.
They hadn't figured out how to exclude me yet.
Right.
It's like, actually, by transitioning, I had kind of beat the system, because I'm not gay anymore. It was just such a ridiculous, kind of notion. But I started getting phone calls from these people that I was had for so long, nice to meet you, love the work you're doing, please don't tell anyone I said that, kind of thing. And one of them in particular was Reverend Andy Oliver, who pastors Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Pete. And Andy's a badass. I mean, he just, his commitment to justice is like nothing I have ever seen. His awareness of the need to decenter himself as a straight cis white man is amazing.
Audible. Yep.
Yeah, but Andy started to pull me in, and as a person that comes from a Christian tradition, I am really fond of the person of Jesus and his teachings. I am largely at this point disinterested in the version of Jesus that I was sold as a teenager, that Jesus was going to make me funny and pretty and smart and solve all my problems. It was bullshit. It didn't work. I had seen too much suffering. I've watched too many faithful people lose everything. I also think that many times we don't know what well or whole even really looks like for us. It's been decades praying for God to fix me, beating my head up against the wall, doing everything that I thought God was asking of me, and begging of God to conform me to the box that I had been told was expected for me to be in, to be a Christian. And I lived convinced that if I were to be truly and fully me, then Jesus wouldn't love me and nobody else would either. And the truth is, my being made well was firmly planted in the hand of living my truth, which we're going to talk more about that in the last section. And in that, and these faithful Christians who pulled me back in to say, no, 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 you have gifts and you have graces that the world needs. Your story, the world needs.
Yes.
And it wasn't just even the risk of the cost and the risk of career, but also transition came with a lot of questions of what was going to happen to my voice.
Right. Because it was singing was a big part of your career. That's what it was.
I mean, that was how I made a living for the first
Right.
decade of
Right.
my career. So there were a lot of risks and a lot of unknowns. But it was through that congregation, Allendale United Methodist Church in St. Pete, Florida, that I found myself for the first time fully known and fully loved in Christian community. Really anywhere, but specifically in Christian community. And so the video that we're going to play next is the photos dispersed throughout of it are actually of congregation members from Allendale who are the very people who are the reason why I'm still sitting here.
Amen. Okay, so Easter, like, what does Easter mean for you? So if Jesus isn't the roll away the stone and, well, that might still be part of it. But how do you look at Easter from your perspective, given all of that background?
Yeah, so I believe in resurrection, but I don't necessarily believe that Jesus, the human, was resurrected.
Ooh, unpack that for us a little bit.
So I believe that the story of resurrection has power, and that us being made new and us being brought to life and us being transformed is at the center of the Christian story. But I'm not able to make leaps like Jesus was born of a virgin. I'm not able to make leaps like Jesus, rose from the dead. And that's why I'll never be a United Methodist pastor.
And can I just say that both of us are like, we just gave birth to the baby Jesus, and now we're like,
why do we have to kill Jesus every year? I don't get it. Like, I just find it really kind of sadistic that we live this liturgical cycle of like, let's birth Jesus and let's murder Jesus and let's raise Jesus from the dead again. It's like, can we just live into, like, I don't think Jesus would be excited about that. I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind. And
what did Jesus have in mind? Like, where do we go with the story?
I mean, so, like, who is Jesus, right? Like, I see Jesus as this political example of what it means to seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly, to borrow from the Jewish text. And so for me, one of a tenet of Christianity that I think reaches beyond, like, it's borrowed for sure, we didn't come up with this, but is the concept of the Imago Dei, that we are made in God's image, that we are that the creation is a reflection of Creator.
Right.
Provided, I would also just like to add in there that I am not a creationist. So that
good to clarify. I mean, I was kind of getting that, but yeah, good clarify.
Dig into that another time.
Yeah, whole nother sermon.
yeah. Again, where was I going? Help me.
That Imago Dei, that we are made in the lens.
Yeah, and so I think that's a great like framing for experience as a meaning-making person. So if I believe, and if Christians believe that we are created, we are made in the image of God, then the more diverse the gathering of people around the table, the more clear and full picture of God we may access.
Mhm.
So for me in that means that my identity as a trans man, your identity as a lesbian,
Mhm.
um, many identities and ideologies and all of that, when we bring that all together, we get a more full picture of who God is.
And a better picture of who God is. Like, that's more of the God that I want, the one with all of the diversity and interestingness. Like, I don't want a God where we're all the same. That's actually pretty boring of a God for me.
And the desire to paint that God is why Christianity became such a political shit show that has become all about, I'm sorry, that has become all about, trying to control people and lead with fear. And I mean, that's the entire problem.
Yeah.
And so because I now can live my full truth, I now am living in my full self. That is now the lens through which I get to experience the person of Jesus. That is the lens through which I get to experience who God is. And now all of a sudden, when I start to read the Bible, Jonathan and David seem like a little bit more than buddies.
Right.
And, they're not, you start to look at the story of the eunuch, and all of a sudden,
the diversity of gender in the story of the eunuch. Yeah, we start to see that through. And it's like
Jesus was resurrected and then became like the lion and the lamb. So I don't know how they identify at this point, right? So I mean, there's just so much that all of a sudden, when you break beyond the confines of what you were fed,
right?
You apply your own experience. Christianity taught me that I couldn't trust my experience. My feelings couldn't be trusted. They weren't real. They were, a product of my sinful nature or whatever, and it's like,
and
that is also garbage.
For the record, I'm never going to convert you, by the way, but the first source for Unitarian Universalism is our own experience in the world. And I think that's one of the reasons why, because we were taught to trust that that's not real. The worth and dignity of all people, seeing it through all of these lenses, seeing the through a queer lens, like what does it mean? What does it open up for us in these stories?
And that's why I started. I mean, one of the very first things that I said this morning was the greatest gift we have to offer are our stories.
Right.
Seeing ourselves reflected in others humanizes us. It makes us a part of community. It makes us a part of a bigger story.
Right.
And so that, I mean.
And we get then the opportunity to see our story as just a one piece. It's not one person's definition of the story. It's our collective stories and all of the richness that comes from that, rather than a single view, which is just not sufficient and boring. So, go ahead.
Yeah, so now, living more fully myself, now all of a sudden, everything feels more open. Everything is not, I wouldn't say clearer, because life is as strange and wonderful for me as it is for everyone else. But, growing up in evangelical Christianity that taught me that these feelings couldn't be trusted, now I get to reclaim that. I get to reclaim evangelism. That's a dirty word for most people. To be an evangelical is that is.
We have some history of that here too, Ben.
And I get it. I picture the people storming the Capitol on January 6th when I picture evangelical Christianity. I do. However, I don't think evangelism is bad. The difference is I'm not trying to evangelize you into some salvation. I'm not trying to evangelize you into some prayer to pray or some ideology to grab, but I would rather evangelize the idea of liberation. Let's evangelize the idea of being your full self. Let's evangelize the idea of embracing the actual Jesus story and the actual things that he was teaching about disrupting systems of injustice and overthrowing oppression and seeking to bring those that are on the margins to the middle so that we can all live together, and know better, do better, and be one, and know that we all belong to each other.
And that becomes a message of collective liberation rather than individual salvation, which only helps one person if it's even true. But collective liberation helps us now, helps us moving forward, all of those things. So is that your,
in the Christian tradition, we hold the word Alleluia through Lent.
Mm.
And we do not say, like, we omit it from our liturgy, from our singing and all of that, which I think it's garbage. Why do we have to kill him? Like, can't we just always live in the Alleluia? Like, I really think that's what Jesus had in mind. But this becomes the great Alleluia, right?
Great Alleluia.
This Alleluia that we give on Easter should be the abiding Alleluia, that we are a collective community of people who all belong to each other, and we should be seeking to build a better world for us and for all who will come after us.
Amen. I love you with that. Ben, by the way, I just totally adore you. Thank you.
I love you, and to everyone, I'm so sorry for all the terrible Christians and all the terrible Christian narratives. Not that it's mine to apologize for, or that I'm even of any like realm to like absolve it, and it can't be absolved, it shouldn't be absolved. But I hope today you've got to experience a different perspective of Christianity, and maybe one that is a little more palatable than the one I grew up with.
And I feel like we need to apologize to you for all the terrible Christians. You have been harmed by that, and for the transphobia that exists in our world, and the homophobia that affects me as well, and all of the oppressions everywhere. So let us work together for that collective liberation